Hi, and welcome to today's Community of Practice call for the Neighborhood Strategy leaders. My name is Devin Kerslake. I'm the Community Animator for Deepening Community at Tamarack Institute, and I will be hosting the call today. For this meeting, we're thrilled to have Michelle Drake and Darren Kropf lead a presentation outlining how they created Kitchener's first neighborhood strategy and how the city will support resident-led initiatives into the future. A lot of work has gone into the making of the strategy, including a large and rather unconventional community engagement process to ensure residents' input shaped the strategy from the very beginning. So here we have Michelle and Darren. Michelle has spent the last 10.5 years working in planning-related fields for municipal and regional governments. As a planner, Michelle is passionate about heritage conservation and community engagement. She believes in the importance of local identity and the value of local knowledge. She spent the last 1.5 years as the project manager responsible for guiding the creation of Kitchener's first neighborhood strategy. She's excited to see the success of an inclusive community engagement process that reached out to residents in a variety of ways, resulting in diverse and meaningful input to help create the neighborhood strategy. And here we also see Darren. He is the Neighborhood Strategy Engagement Associate at the City of Kitchener. He came to the city after many years working in the nonprofit sector on issues like environmental sustainability, peace building, and emergency food assistance. He's enjoyed pushing the boundaries of standard community engagement practices while developing the neighborhood strategy, and is constantly amazed at the cool ideas that the community comes up with if you take the time to ask. So welcome, both of you. I'm so excited to have you here. I will just move to the next slide, and Michelle and Darren, you can start your presentation.
Thanks so much, Devin. So as was mentioned, both Darren and I are here on the line, and we'll share the responsibility of giving you a bit of an update on the work that we've done over the last, I guess, almost 2 years now. For those of you that may not be familiar with the City of Kitchener, I thought I would at least start with just some very high-level, quick, basic information. So Kitchener is a 2-tier municipality located in southwestern Ontario. Our upper tier is the region of Waterloo with a population of just over 500,000. And then the city itself is the lower tier municipality. The city is the largest of 3 cities and 4 townships within our region, with our population being just over 230,000. And in terms of neighborhood development, even before the city started work on the neighborhood strategy, the city has in place 13 community centers across the city, as well as 31 affiliated neighborhood associations located across the city. In terms of a bit of background, in terms of why we chose to begin to develop a neighborhood strategy, I'm not going to get into any of the major details, partly because they're not as exciting and partly because I wasn't involved with many of the earlier pieces of the puzzle. But you can see from this slide that there were various plans and strategies dating back to 2005, so over 10 years ago now, that recommended that Kitchener take a new approach and develop a neighborhood strategy. And so this work officially began in the spring of 2015. So to give you a sense of the main or the key players that helped us out throughout our process, in terms of staff, we had essentially a staff team of 4 that were quite instrumental in leading the project. The first being Michael May, our project champion. The second being myself, Michelle Drake, as the project manager. The third being my colleague here with me today, Darren Kropf, as our engagement associate. And then one of our other colleagues, Mark Hildebrand, who was our project team staff co-chair. But from the very beginning, it was important for residents to lead our process. And so as part of our project team, we ensured that there was a strong representation from residents and other community groups. So you'll see that there were 16 resident representatives on our committee. There was 10 staff representatives. And you can see on the slide sort of how those were broken down in terms of residents, and then what we call 3 of our primary community partners, being the Festival of Neighbourhoods, United Way, and the Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council. We also then connected our work to one existing committee, which was our Safe and Healthy Community Advisory Committee, which is an advisory committee of our council. And then we also created a new committee, which was what we called our Neighbourhood Strategy Employee Advisory Committee, which was an internal committee with additional staff representatives. So both of these committees received regular updates. They helped us test the information along the way. They provided their feedback along the way, and they also helped us build the final strategy. And then the last piece I'll mention there is that our project team also divided themselves into 4 subcommittees, and that was just to help focus on some areas of interest that individuals had, and then some main areas of the work that we were doing. So in terms of our visioning process, we were able to learn and draw from experiences and resources that were shared by the City of London. And our process, I guess, took a slightly different approach, but as I said, we did borrow from London. So we took about 3 months with our project team to develop that vision. We started with asking each individual project team member to participate in an individualized visioning exercise. Then we brought all of their individual comments together as part of a large project team group discussion. And then we ended that work with a democracy. And in the end, what happened was our project team endorsed the vision that's on the slide here, along with a series of outcomes. So our main vision being that the neighborhood strategy will help people connect and work together to do great things in their neighborhood. In terms of the bulleted items on the far right of the slide, these were what we initially called our outcomes, and these were things that the project team believed that all residents and all neighborhoods should strive for. So in essence, we think that neighborhoods should strive to be diverse, connected, inclusive, safe, engaged, and accessible. As our process proceeded, we rebranded these or recalled these our characteristics of a great neighborhood so that they would be more plain language and understandable to the community. And I'll touch on these characteristics likely at the very end of our presentation because they also relate to our evaluation piece. So during the first summer of our project, we started our kind of first round of community engagement. And what we did was we set up a lemonade stand that attended various events across the city. So as you can imagine, we were handing out free lemonade and often a cookie as well in exchange for people to spend a few minutes to spend their time completing a survey for us. The survey itself had very high-level questions about what people love about their neighborhood, as well as how they describe the size of their neighborhood on a visual map. But really the greatest value of this particular phase was us starting to build awareness about the work that we were starting to do to develop the neighborhood strategy. And so we really wanted to encourage residents to be aware of the process and sign up for our e-newsletter so that they could stay informed and provide their input during later phases of our community engagement process. So the next slide is some infographics that our amazing in-house design staff created to explain what we had learned from those lemonade stands. And ultimately, we were able to use what we learned during that first very high-level engagement piece to help us formulate more in-depth questions for future phases of our engagement work. The biggest lesson we learned during that initial phase was about how our residents or how individuals perceive the size of their neighborhood or the boundaries of their neighborhood. And so this information greatly influenced the direction that our strategy took, and that the project team made a very deliberate decision not to define neighborhoods or to identify neighborhood boundaries on a map. Instead, the decision was to let residents draw these boundaries on their own and develop their own local identity and pride. So with that, I'm going to pass the presentation on to Darren for a few minutes to chat about the next phase of our community engagement.
Thanks, Michelle, and hi, everyone. When we get into phase 2 of our community engagement, this is really about raising more awareness about the strategy. We knew that we wanted to do our full major consultation during the summer. That's when lots of people are out and about. So we needed some ways to generate an excitement and enthusiasm until then, because we didn't want to go completely silent between our lemonade stand over the winter. So we came up with a few different options, and to be clear, this is largely our volunteer-led project team. These are not my creative ideas. I wish I could take credit for them. So first is what we call Love My Hood stories. A volunteer photographer went out into the neighborhood and just captured photos and asked people what they love about their neighborhood. So very brief stories. But very compelling photography, and we had some really strong engagement on social media. So we released about 2 of these per week over a number of months, and it really just started to build that enthusiasm that people had for their neighborhoods. One of the lessons we learned is that this ended up being our most successful and positive social media campaign ran by the city. So it might not shock people on this call to know that municipalities don't always get positive comments on their social media feeds. So this was very nice to have people chiming in and saying, oh, I love that about my neighborhood too, or it's so great to hear about different parts of my city. So people are really excited about it. We also learned that it's way harder to get participants to be photographed and put on social media than you'd think in this age of everyone's taking selfies. But it was really hard for us to get people to be willing to do this, and especially diverse participants. So, you know, I could rope in a bunch of my friends from all of the same neighborhood, but we really wanted different neighborhoods. We wanted diverse ages and backgrounds, so that was a challenge for us. The second piece was coloring books. So our project team subcommittee suggested that we make some coloring books for the kids, and then someone said that there's this thing called adult coloring too, and a few of us thought this was just a really bad joke. But it turns out it's true. Adult coloring was a huge trend, especially when we came out with it last year. So we ended up creating 2 coloring books. The kids version had a full storyline about a kid showing off parts of their neighborhood, and that was developed by volunteers, and then our graphic designers on staff here actually designed the pages. For the adult coloring book, we put out a call for artists to the community. We had about 15 applications for that and chose 3. And so we paid 3 local artists to develop 3 or 4 pages each to make this coloring book. Sponsorships were really key to doing these. These were a fairly significant cost, so we had some sponsors come on board. We launched the adult coloring book at a beer and coloring event. Turns out one of our local museums has a whole series of beer and various hobbies, and so we jumped on that bandwagon. Overall, we got quite a lot of media exposure because it was combining something that was trending and people were talking about and bringing it super local. So the local media was really, really good to us. We got in print, radio, and TV. Some lessons learned on the coloring books. It is a high cost, especially when you're not getting any actual consultation out of it. So we aren't expecting to get any feedback through this. It's really just an awareness piece. So this would not have been an option for us without sponsors on board. And lastly, to get out into the community and get some buzz going right on the street, we gave some hot chocolate and our coloring books away at different libraries, pools, and parks. And our lesson learned, hot chocolate is not very popular when it's warm. So even though we did this in March, it turned out last year was sunny and snowless and nobody wanted our hot chocolate. I think if we did it this year, we would be just fine because it's super cold today for those who are not in Ontario. Moving on to phase 3, this is now getting into where we're actually consulting and getting feedback on how we're going to develop our neighborhood strategy. And this is where we're willing to pull out all the stops to consult the community. Our communications and engagement subcommittee did some research on best practices related to community engagement, and they came up with 9 principles that guided how we reached out in terms of selecting our tactics and reaching different stakeholders. I'm not going to go into them, but what was very helpful from this exercise is it made us realize that we we need to go above and beyond what is typical for city consultations in order to reach diverse people. So we can't just hear from the same people that fill out surveys constantly, and we can't just hear from, in our case, mostly downtown people who are the ones who are most engaged in city consultations. It was really important that we heard from all neighborhoods. So we wanted to hear different neighborhoods. We wanted to hear from different demographics, ages, cultural backgrounds, abilities. And so we knew that in order to do this, we needed a different array of tactics. It wasn't going to be enough just to host a public information night and put a survey online. We needed to have different ways to engage the community. So before I explain each of those tactics, at this point I'll pass it back to Michelle, who will share how we determined exactly what we were going to ask from the community.
So looking back, one of the most important steps of our process was developing the right questions to ask our residents in our community. So we took 3 months to develop the questions. What we did was we decided to bring on a consultant because we felt we didn't have that expertise in-house to know, are we asking the right questions? Once we start to get the feedback, how do we record that information, and then how do we analyze it later on in order to build our strategy? So once we brought on that consultant, they were able to review all existing information pertaining to Kitchener's neighborhood. So there were previous surveys that had been done as part of other projects, most recently as part of our most recent strategic plan that spoke about neighborhoods. So we were able to use that information and build an exercise where we used the World Cafe style for our project team, as well as our employee advisory committee, to work through a series of exercises about neighborhood themes and questions. And essentially what came out of that first round of cafe exercises was a refinement of information and results that we then were able to dive a little bit deeper into the information by hosting sort of a second round of World Cafe exercises, but that time just with one of our subcommittees, so our communications and engagement subcommittee. So that was probably a group of about 10 volunteers who then were able to dive a little bit deeper into the ultimately, what we did with that information came up with the themes that are noted on the slide here today. So we heard a lot about places and spaces, the vision and the characteristics of a great neighborhood, the importance of collaboration, and the importance of connections between people and neighbors. So that was what helped us start to develop the actual questions. And once those questions were drafted, we were able to actually pilot them with a few different groups. So we piloted them with our, not just our project team, but also our neighborhood association group of representatives, as well as with a group that we call our community partners, which we'll touch on a little bit later. And so those groups were able to actually work through the questions, participate in a debriefing exercise. So if they didn't understand something, or if they didn't like a word, they could flag that, and we could make sure that these the questions were going to not only be useful, but also be understandable to as many people as possible. And then all of that feedback, once we went out to the public with those questions, was consolidated by the consultant, and we can touch on that again later. So I'll turn it back to Darren, and he can describe those unique tactics that he alluded to earlier.
Thanks, Michelle. So we'll move on to the next slide here, which talks about our neighborhood party. So we kicked off this phase of engagement with a party, and you'll note this is not a public information night or a open house drop-in city consultation. This is a party. It started with birthday party style invitations that we mailed to quite a large stakeholder list of groups like cultural and faith communities, arts groups, sports teams, recreation clubs, all sorts of different stakeholders that we thought might be interested in coming. And we had flyers, brochures, radio ads, ads in the paper, and lots of work on social media to get the word out. And then the event itself really felt like a party. It was quite a buzz in the room. We had live music to start the event, featuring some musicians that often play at one of our local porch parties. We had a free barbecue, which was cooked by a local baseball team. There were a number of opening activities as people were eating and just kind of milling about and listening to the music. They were hosted by local artists and community partners, including storytelling by the Kitchener Public Library, some face painting, a little library workshop, where some volunteers actually made 5 little libraries, and then we gave them away as door prizes. We had some placemaking booths where people who like to do placemaking shared about what that is and what they do in their neighborhood. There was a cardboard zone, a kind of a craft center, and lots more. And of course, as you can see in the picture, no party is complete without a mascot. In this case, we had Kirby the kangaroo, who was the mascot for our title sponsor, so that was a great fit for them. After this informal gathering, which we really did see as a whole family-friendly event, we had people of all ages attend. We moved into a more formal part of the agenda, and we did provide some childcare for this part so that kids could stay and hopefully their parents could enjoy the more formal part of the agenda. This featured a keynote speaker, Jim Dyers, who is an amazing world-renowned speaker on neighborhood development and community development out of Seattle. Anytime I listen to him, I want to move to Seattle because they do so many cool things there. And so that was a great, just kind of inspirational, getting us all thinking about, dreaming about the possibilities. And then we had presentations by 3 local speakers in an Ignite style format. So each speaker had 20 slides that stayed up for 15 seconds, and it progressed automatically whether they were ready for it or not, so they had to be pretty succinct in their comments. But they talked about the projects that they've worked on in their neighborhood. So talked about sponsoring refugees as a group of neighbors, planting an edible forest, and doing little creative placemaking along the street in a neighborhood. So really creative options. And then we concluded this evening with some consultation. So we broke out into about 15 different focus groups at small tables. It was a shorter time frame for this consultation, so we had staff at each table to facilitate. When I talk about the focus groups again later, those were not facilitated by staff, but we wanted to make sure that people were ready to jump right in with conversation. So a few lessons learned from hosting this kind of event. It was a really effective tool to pull in some different community groups with planning and hosting the event. So all of those different activities were led by different groups, and of course they encouraged people they know and their neighbors to attend, which helped with our numbers. The other thing that's important to note is that free events have a very high ratio of no-shows. So we had opened the registration. Because we were offering food, we wanted people to register ahead of time. And when we reached about 500 people, we thought, well, this is about max capacity for the building, so we better close the registration. And then in the night of the event, only about 400 people attended. So we had close to 100 no-shows, which was a little bit disappointing, but you know, lesson learned that we probably could have kept the registration table or the registration open a little longer. But still, at the end, 400 people is still quite an event, and probably more than the average city open house would have. Moving next into street teams, this is a tactic that involves one-on-one interviews lasting about 10 to 15 minutes. So what we do is we send out people who have our questions, survey questions in hand, but it's intentionally an interview so that you can have a little bit of conversation. So if someone isn't quite sure or doesn't have an idea right away, you can prompt them. Or if they have a really great idea, we could ask some follow-up questions to really get details, because these were open-ended questions. So if, for example, one question was just, do you have any ideas to make your neighborhood even better? So you want to kind of flesh that out a little bit. The great thing about the street team tool is you can go to where the people are, and it's a really effective tool for targeting hard-to-reach stakeholders and different geography across the city. So we went to different events, sports games, youth and seniors groups, parks, splash pads, bus stations, shopping centers, school fun fairs, and more. For this tool, I even set up an interactive map where I pinned all the different places we had been or were planning to go, so that I could be very confident that we had reached all parts of the city. And at one point in the process, I realized that we hadn't really gone to one particular ward. So then I was able to reach out to the ward councillor and other neighborhood associations in that ward and make sure that we did connect with those groups. So it really helped to make sure that we did hear from all sorts of places. As an extra incentive to encourage people to participate, we offered some free swag. In this case, it was a folding picnic blanket, so you could swing it over your shoulder and then unfold it when you got to the park. A lot of people loved the swag, thought it was great. Some people declined. They'd rather just talk about neighborhoods. And then, of course, some people declined talking to us at all, which is just fine. The biggest challenge we faced with these street teams was personnel. So we did hire some part-time staff to conduct the street teams, but our hope was that we would have one part-time staff go to each location and then bring a team of 3, 4, 5 volunteers and kind of direct them and kind of do it all as a team. In reality, we were only able to recruit 1 or 2 and oftentimes no volunteers to join those staff. So that's one of our biggest lessons learned was volunteer recruitment and retention. We found that it could be a bit lonely for volunteers to kind of go out and interview as part of a 2 or 3 person team. So in hindsight, it might have been better just to focus on some events that we knew we really needed a lot of help and just said, you know, for these 10, we'd really like to get volunteers and then rely on staff for the other ones. We also learned shopping centers, not a great place to connect, unfortunately. People don't really want to stop and chat with you. In one case, we didn't have a single person stop to chat over a 2-hour period, so that was a bit disappointing. And lastly, if you're going to do street teams, be lean and be mobile. So Michelle talked about the previous summer we did a lemonade stand with a big tent and lots of lemonade and cookies and stuff. It was a really great engagement tool. People loved it, but it took a lot of time coordinating. And one simple logistic, you needed to have a pretty large vehicle to be able to move the tent. So for street teams, we realized very quickly the less stuff you have, the easier it is to schedule. So clipboards, surveys, and swag, and that's it. That way you can get out nice and quick. In some cases, our staff were doing 2 or 3 locations in the same day so we could hit different parts of the city. And you don't want to spend time setting up a booth doing that. Next was focus groups. So we wanted to develop some focus groups so that we could get some more in-depth feedback. We developed a moderator's kit so residents or organizations could host their own focus groups and just send us notes afterwards. So we didn't want to have to send staff to all of these different groups, but make them really simple, plain language, simple steps to follow that people could do it themselves. For the most part, they took about an hour in length, depending on how long people wanted to chat. We kept them fun and conversational. As an extra incentive, one of our local sponsors provided free food if requested, so that was a nice little perk. And we ended up developing 2 different focus group guides. So the first was targeted towards residents. This is your average person, and we would just encourage them to invite friends and neighbors over to their house or meet in the park or a community center and ask them to dream about what their neighborhood might look like in 10 years from now and jot those ideas down. A separate process and guide was for organizations, and these were for organizations that have specific mandates to serve in neighborhoods, so whether that was a neighborhood association or a not-for-profit organization. And so in this case, we wanted to learn how those organizations are working in neighborhoods, how we could foster greater collaboration, and so we used the characteristics of a great neighborhood that Michelle mentioned to really help us understand how people are working at those different things and how we could do that better. Some lessons learned on this tool. Focus groups are pretty tried and true technique. They've been used 1,000 times, but they are really effective. We found this was our most in-depth feedback with our most passionate stakeholders. So when people gave us ideas here, really tangible next steps, things that we could apply right away. We also learned that it takes a lot of effort to recruit these groups, especially the residents. So we did, get some ads on the radio and do lots of social media stuff, but we also sent letters out, but in the end, it's really all about shoulder tapping. So we made phone calls to some particular target groups, such as faith and culture groups, and then some, just people that we know are super active, and that's where we got our people to be willing to do that. So you really need to be prepared to do some shoulder tapping. Next, of course, we need to be online. So we had a couple of different ways of doing that. We developed an online survey. It took about 3 minutes to complete, so pretty short. And this was based on advice from our web platform host who does online city engagement. And again, on their advice, we did mostly closed-ended versions of the street team questions. So it's important that people want to be able to do this quick, and they need to more likely to check boxes and rank things and do those kinds of things than answer 7 or 8 open-ended questions. One of the lessons we learned is that it's pretty difficult getting participants on issues that aren't so-called hot button issues. So at about the same time, backyard chicken coops was also an online survey, and it was a bit disheartening to see that one go. Thousands of people jumping on that one, but it's polarizing, and so that's why that has so many more participants. So we made sure that we did a lot of social media engagement to try to drive people to that. The other tool that we did, if you can just jump back one slide there, was an ideas forum. So this was an open-ended forum where people could post pretty much any idea they had to make their neighborhood great. Which was kind of neat. We got some pretty creative ideas there. And we tried to be responsive so we could actually respond. So if there was a great idea, be like, hey, that's cool. Have you tried this? Are there things that we could think about? And then also for those ideas that were out of scope, they might have been more related to, fix this pothole on my street. We might be able to point them to the people that they should talk to if they want to follow up on that. Lesson learned here is that it's hard to be responsive at times when you have a lot of other pressing priorities. And then we also learned it's hard to promote 2 different online tools at the same time. So, think about that. You don't want to have too many different things that you're trying to promote. Moving next to the placemaking challenge, I'm just going to take a quick drink of water here. So this was our most outside-the-box form of engagement, and if you ask me, is also the coolest. Given that one of our directives from Council to develop the neighborhood strategy was that they wanted a framework for neighborhood placemaking. And so we just figured instead of just asking generic questions about placemaking in general, let's encourage some people to actually do it, and we'll take our lessons from that. Because after all, not everything can be learned through a survey. So we provided grants of up to $1,000 for groups to do placemaking in their neighborhood. So you can see the picture there is a picture of a park. It's a treed area of the park that was largely had garbage in it, wasn't really used. So volunteers went in and cleaned it up and then put some, transformed it into a kind of a magical enchanted forest with some streamers and little fairy doors and really cool stuff in there. Some of the things that we learned from doing this was the kinds of projects that residents were interested in. So a couple of groups did things on cul-de-sacs. It wasn't really on our radar to have a cul-de-sac program, and you'll see later that one of our recommendations was to develop an easy way for people to animate their cul-de-sac. We also learned a lot about our internal staff processes, and particularly things that kind of make it difficult for residents to do things. So if we want residents to be more involved in their neighborhood, but they face barriers, what are those barriers? So for example, we learned that one volunteer in doing this challenge actually had to contact 8 different staff to get their approval. So this was one of our champions. She did it with a smile, but not sure she would do it every year, and a lot of people would just give up. So those are the kinds of things that we need to fix. We also learned that cul-de-sacs are technically part of the right-of-way according to provincial roadway legislation. And so they require road closures to do anything remotely related to them, even though in one case it was a huge cul-de-sac, almost the size of a soccer field. Seemed a little silly to close the road when all of the activity was on the cul-de-sac. We also learned about something as simple as locates. So even for setting up badminton nets, if you're breaking the ground on public land, our rules stipulate that you should get a locate done. And of course, to make it even more complicated, it's a different number and a actual fee than the number you would call if you're a residential homeowner. So some people found almost half their grant was taken just by getting locates. So that's something that we're going to be looking into to see if we can find some alternative solutions to that. So I did want to show a few more pictures of the placemaking challenge because it really is one of the coolest. So if you get to the next slide here, you can see what people came up with. The big picture there is a beautiful mural on what was just a storage shed at the back of a park. So now it's actually a beautiful area that people can go and check out. In the top right is a picture of a gaga ball court. If you haven't heard of gaga ball, it's a form of dodgeball, very inclusive. Anyone can jump in and have some fun. And so it was on a cul-de-sac. And what I like mentioning about this story is that they invited people on their cul-de-sac, only about 20 houses. It's not huge, but we learned that one of the families on that street had just moved in and hadn't met any of their neighbors whatsoever. And so this was a way that they got invited, they met their neighbors, and so it's a really good impact story to say this is why we do placemaking. It gets people meeting each other. And then lastly, we have a community information board that people put up asking people to jot down their ideas about their neighborhood. They put it next to a major active transportation trail in their neighborhood. So you can see they're soaking wet. Unfortunately, it was a rainy day that time. But they've raved about this board. They've used it on other different events, and they're actually planning to apply to the city again to create 2 more of them to spread out into their neighborhood. So I'll now turn it back to Michelle to share a little bit more about our Phase 3 community engagement.
So I think I'm also going to probably be a bit briefer on some of our upcoming slides than I was intending to be, just looking at the time. Darren and I have so much to share that we're taking all the time, but we do want to leave at least a few minutes for questions. So with that, I'll just jump into, so in terms of the next phase or the additional things that we did during Phase 3 of our community engagement, not sure if others are experiencing this, but our council is has expressed concerns with what they perceive as broad and somewhat ad hoc engagement processes. And their concern is that they may not be truly reflective of the voice of the entire community. So they have, on more than one occasion with more than one project, asked for there to be a statistically representative survey or sample somehow of the community so that they know that what is being presented to them is rooted in the community. So we did, briefly, I'll just say we did retain a consultant. We went with Environics to administer a survey. It was largely based on our street team focus group and online questions. And we were essentially able to sort of quasi-use the results of that survey as a control group. And the good news was that what we learned from that statistically representative telephone survey aligned quite well with what we were hearing in those other tools that Darren was describing. And probably most importantly, we also learned that although we had no control over the age or geographic location of people that decided to participate in some of those other tools, in the end, that information also aligned. So we had good representation from diverse people across the city. Another important part of the project was involving staff along the way. So we already mentioned our project team, and we mentioned our employee advisory committee. Darren briefly mentioned Jim Deers earlier on, and so when he came and spoke to the community at the party, we also had him speak with staff. And so that was a really important piece to help staff start think about how they can support neighborhoods and residents in different ways. And then we also did some other exercises with staff. So we held an interactive forum looking for them to provide their input on how we can be supporting resident-led initiatives. And we also held an exercise where we asked staff to help us figure out what those things are that make it hard for people to do things in their neighborhoods. And so we found bringing staff along the way was a really good idea, and we think moving forward is going to ensure that as we implement our actual strategy action items, that staff are on board to make sure that we truly are supporting the community. Another exercise that we went through was what we called our neighborhood supporter versus rule enforcer exercise. You can see two images up there that kind of summarize the end of that exercise with a bit of a democracy process. But essentially we asked our project team and our employee advisory committee to kind of tell us a little bit about what is a neighborhood supporter, what is a rule enforcer, what do those people look like, or how do they operate, how are they perceived, what would residents say about them. And then if you think about them on the spectrum, although we know they're not necessarily, you know, hard end on each end of the spectrum, where would you put the city today and where do we want the city to be? So as you can see from the dots in the images, you know, obviously there is a desire for more of a neighborhood supporter role being played by staff, although you can see that a lot of staff also feel a huge importance for there to be balance between, you know, rules that protect the municipality and then allowing residents to do those fun things in their neighborhood. So with that, I'll turn it back to Darren.
Thanks, Michelle. So I'll go quickly through this part. We did host a number of meetings specifically with some key stakeholders, our neighborhood associations, and our community partners, which was helpful feedback there. We'll skip to the next slide there. We also did a called Reducing Municipal Barriers meetings, or red tape meetings. So we heard from the community that one of the best ways the city can help neighbors do things in their neighborhoods is just to make it easier for them to get stuff done. So we simply just asked, what are the pieces of red tape that... Yeah, so just to finalize on the red tape meetings, we did end up having a specific recommendation then that spoke to those red tape pieces that were identified. We'll move to the next slide here. I did briefly mention that we had some sponsorships on board, which was really helpful to expand our reach, and we'll leave it there because I'd rather get to your questions. And then lastly, on our community engagement, or phase 4, obviously we need to figure out how we're going to, you know, take all that we learned and apply it. So we had huge data entry for this, and thankfully a consultant helped us develop some insights, find out what exactly the community was asking for, and then we did a bit of a gap analysis. So if the community is asking for this, what kinds of programs or projects or supports would help them achieve those goals? Ultimately, we came up with a list of draft recommendations. We tested these with the public again by having an online survey that people could kind of rank them as most important and provide some feedback as to what we heard. And then we tested them with staff, we consulted business plans, funding, and we eventually created a 3-year implementation schedule for the entire strategy. So some successes that we had, we reached a lot of people. Just skip to the next slide there, Devin. Over 5,000 people provided input, but it wasn't just about numbers. So we also talked about in-depth conversations. So we tracked how many hours of conversation. We also had very strong diversity of participants. And in the end, we had a lot of great ideas and excellent feedback that we believe means our strategy is founded on the community's wishes. Some challenges that we found, we really needed to balance quantity versus depth versus diversity. So it would be very easy to just get a whole lot of numbers by going to the same people over and over, but we really wanted to get diversity, so there's a bit of a balance there. I've talked about the street team volunteers. It's difficult to keep active and current emails for people, so you can circle back and report back to them. And lastly, we did ask some demographic questions, particularly around age and ethnicity. And a lot of residents pushed back against this. They didn't think it was appropriate for us to ask that, or wondered why we were going to use it. And in the end, we didn't really have a great plan to use it either. So lesson learned, we probably wouldn't ask that again in the future. Back to Michelle.
So to give you very high level information about, so now we've done all that engagement, and we've now have a series of recommendations, or what we started to call our action items. So now we have what we call Love My Hood. So we have moved from using the language Neighbourhood Strategy to using the language Love My Hood, Kitchener's Guide to Great Neighbourhoods. It's all about the resident-led approach being supported by the city. There were 3 areas of focus identified, so basically things around great places, connected people, and working together. And then there were 18 action items. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see the 18 action items. I wasn't going to describe them at all, but just so you can see the types of things that came out of our process and that we'll be working on over the next 3 years. And definitely, if you want to read our strategy, you'll see the details of what each of those action items entails. And then to kind of finish up quickly, the next few slides in terms of what's next. So we do have a rigorous implementation plan in process already. We're running it out the door, I think. So we've got a 3-year schedule put in place. So we can't tackle all 18 actions at once. So we've got a plan to do a certain number each year. We are putting dedicated staff resources in place in a newly formed neighborhood development office. So there'll be a supervisor and an associate role in that office. We've been able to commit almost $500,000 in funding in a reserve that can be used to implement those 18 action items. And then we have a plan to evaluate. So in terms of that evaluation piece, I know this group talked about it a lot. I can briefly say that we looked at work that London did and that Hamilton did. We tried to build a research partnership with one of the local universities here in our region. Unfortunately, we were unsuccessful, although we were able to align our work with the Canadian Index of Wellbeing. So we are using our characteristics of a great neighborhood as sort of a measurement piece. We've established some indicators that can measure each of those characteristics, and then at the same time we've also developed a survey tool that can measure some of the more qualitative or perception-based pieces of information. So we kind of sped up at the end there, my apologies, but that's kind of everything we've done at a very high level nutshell. So if there's any questions, we're happy to answer, and people can always follow up with us at a later date as well.
Thanks so much, Michelle and Darren. I'm just reeling from the piles of work that you have been successful on over the last while, and it's so inspiring to hear about. I just have the slide up right now for your contact information, and I'll leave it there for a couple of minutes in case anyone wants to jot that down. And then, yeah, I'm happy to go into sort of a question period. I had one quick one from Kimberly to get us going. She was wondering what platform you used when you did the ideas forum. I can't remember if you mentioned that in your presentation.
It's called Engage Kitchener, but it's the organization is Peak Democracy, okay. And all of the local municipalities in Waterloo Region use it.
Okay, interesting. I know Sylvia, you had a question as well. Do you want to pipe in and ask your question about the evaluation plan, or?
Yeah, I mean, given that this, as you noted, Michelle, was such a focused issue for so many of the folks in this community of practice, wondered if you had any sort of summary or more detailed kind of resource around your evaluation plan and what some of those indicators might be that you'd be willing to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So if people are interested, we have, for the most part, almost all of our information is on our website. So if you go to lovemyhood.ca, you'll be able to read our strategy document, our staff report that went to council, a number of appendices, and there was one document called, I think it's called How Did We Make It? And so that particular document does provide details on how we related those characteristics to specific indicators that we're looking to measure. For us, I'll use the caveat that we were hoping to build that research partnership. We weren't successful. Our council and senior management struggled with supporting funding for this type of thing. So we had to make sure that the indicators we selected would be available and readily or easy to access and easy to analyze and report on. So they're fairly common things that probably other municipalities would be able to use as well. And then the perception-based piece, that survey, we don't have that available on our website, but if someone were curious, they can send us an email and we can share that.
I was so impressed with a lot of your engagement strategies, Michelle and Darren, especially your really tangible ways that people in the community can could be aware of what you're doing, but then also to get connected. I know, Darren, you said something about your volunteers coming up with like the coloring book and some of those other kind of engagement ideas. How did you guys have brainstorming sessions to just generate those kinds of ideas, or what was the process?
Yeah, so that was part of our communications and engagement subcommittee of the project team.
Okay.
And so part of our research process was to see what different tactics were available and to do some brainstorming and kind of come up with a lot of them. And then we kind of evaluated them based on whether we thought it would help us achieve our goals in terms of reaching out to diverse audiences and being able to really engage deeply with people. So it was really a kind of a bunch of brainstorming exercises, seeing what else is out there, and then coming up with the best solution.
Yeah, it's just so amazing how you guys are able to really strike that balance between, reaching people where they were and then still having this kind of high level, hugely successful, it seems to me, strategy, right? Overall structure. It was such a nice balance that we saw to kind of develop over the last while. Just want to remind you about our Community of Practice page. That's where you can stay up to date on when the next meetings are, what's coming up, who the guests will be, but also there's a little sign up form. So if you want to share that with anyone to join us in this community of practice, that'd be amazing. Please do, or connect them with me and I'd be happy to also sign them up. Our next meeting is April 13th. We will be featuring Stacey Barter. She's with BC Healthy Communities and she'll be speaking about something called Resilient Streets, which I'm really excited to share with everybody. So that will be coming up next month. As well, we are, up to our eyeballs and planning already for Montreal. It's our national gathering, our annual gathering for community. We're really excited about it, and it will be a bilingual event. We have 3 keynote speakers confirmed. Natalie Fortin, she's a francophone in Montreal who works with the Montreal Tables, Neighbourhood Tables Coalition. There's Michael McAfee traveling from his work with PolicyLink and Promise Neighborhoods. He's coming up to Montreal to meet us and deliver a keynote. And of course, our beloved John McKnight is joining us as well. He's the co-founder of Asset-Based Community Development, and he will be speaking to some new ideas and related to ABCD at our event. So please visit that website. That's our information about the event and registration. Say thank you to Michelle and Darren. Again, it was so amazing to hear your presentation, and thanks for taking the time to join us today. In a few days, I'll send everyone the email with the recording and any links. Please share questions with me. And I think that's all for today. And so I'm looking forward to next month. And stay tuned and talk to you again. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.